constant, that which everyone believed to be a perfectly created and unchanging universe, changed. Seeing this small change from below, Galileo started thinking unthinkable thoughts. He started to question whether that which everyone held as absolute truth could be wrong. So he built a telescope and he turned it to the evening sky. And in that one small movement, the Earth, which had been standing still for centuries, started to move. It started to revolve around the sun. The sun and all the planets moved out of the center of the universe to a distant galaxy right in the center of infinity. In this moment, in which Galileo's curiosity, willingness to change, and technology converged, he was able to start shifting the thinking of all of humanity. And he launched the scientific revolution that brought us to where we are today. And I believe that today we're standing on the very edge of a similar shift in thinking. One that will launch us into an unimagined future, which is what profound shifts in thinking always do. And I have first-hand experience in this. You see, had the thought crossed my mind back in 2005 that by 2007 I would become the first woman to drive solo once around the planet, that by 2011 I'd be a published author, and that by 2012 I'd once again be traveling the world talking about the evolution and revolution of thought, I would have stopped winding my curlers quite so tight at night. You see, because back then I was living the high life in Cape Town, South Africa. I had achieved everything that success demands of us today in society. I had the house, the cars, successful career, interesting friends, happy divorce. But then a couple of things happened in my life that caused me to sell up this life of sun and sea and announce to anyone who cared to listen that I was going on a quest. I was going on a quest for knowledge. I was going to set out in the world. I was going to tear away the media curtain. I was going to see what the world looked like with my own eyes. And to help me do this, I joined an organization called Women Welcome Women Worldwide, which Jane and I are both members of, that would allow me to get behind the front doors of the women from around the world. This organization is also known as 5W. And I bought a car, a glorified French delivery van, which would not just take me once around the planet, but it was to turn into a living artwork called One Planet, One People, in which I asked all the men of the world to write a wish for the world on the car. The first man I approached to start off this One Planet, One People project was a rather precise type, a German dentist called Peter. When I stepped up to Peter with my Sharpie and I said, "Please write on my brand new car with a permanent black marker," the man backed off in horror, plummeting car values running through his head. It took a little shift in thinking on his part to pluck up the courage, take up the pen, and write in very small letters, tolerance. But once Peter had broken the ice, it made it increasingly easy for other men to take up the pen and add their thoughts and wishes to what was to be known as the Wishmobile. As I traveled through Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic. My journey then took me into Switzerland, where I was a guest of a 5W member called Ragi, who is the principal of a primary school, and her husband, Marcus, who is a publisher. And Marcus, on hearing about the project, the One Planet project, immediately wanted to write something. But after scanning the card, turned to me in disappointment when he saw that Tolerance had already been written. So I pointed out to him that this was not a competition for originality. And if every man wrote Tolerance, that too would be a good thing. So Tolerance appeared for the second time. And then I set off over the Alps into Italy, where I immediately lost my first level of communication, that of the spoken word. And right there, my thinking had to undergo a little shift in order to work out how to communicate to the men what I wanted them to do with the car. I also quickly noticed that my lack of language and my decision to travel all alone was putting up invisible barriers between myself and the world that I would have to overcome with methods other than the spoken word. But my brain, stuck in its habits, could find no solution better than to speak louder and louder. I spoke slower and slower. Then I started flapping my hands and pulling funny faces. And in order to be understood, I ended up having to make a complete fool of myself. And in doing this, I quite inadvertently broke through a very personal barrier, that of the ego. And in breaking through this ego barrier, started seeing things in the world that had true value. And one of these was pointed out to me in Sarajevo, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, by Zlatan. He was only 12 when the war broke out in those parts. And he tells the story of his father reassuring the family that all the noise they were hearing outside was just military maneuvers, until a bomb crashed into the middle of their family home. They had to take refuge in a damp parking garage, but he assures me that they were lucky. They had running water. Those that didn't had to face the snipers every day. Leaving Zlatan, my journey then takes me across the border into Bulgaria, where I instantly become illiterate, as I lose my second level of communication, that of the written word. From now on, I would be dealing with Cyrillic, Hellenic, Arabic, Mandarin. I could no longer read the street signs, the advertising billboards, the magazines, the newspapers, let alone understand the radio or the television. And so, as I was traveling further and further east, I realized I was also traveling into a deeper and deeper media silence. But you know, I didn't feel in the least deprived. In fact, now that my brain didn't have to process this blizzard of information we deal with every day, it started coming up with new ways, or perhaps old ways, of communicating with the world. Ways perhaps that we're all born with. Things that we today call our sixth senses, things that include empathy, intuition, insight, our gut feeling. Things that became increasingly important as I traveled further and further east, crossing borders in faraway countries. Borders are still the only thing that give me concern when I travel. Our species, we love borders. We draw lines across the planet, plant flags to claim ownership on things that cannot be owned. We'll fight to the death to defend that which we falsely believe is ours. We are taught to put borders and barriers between everything: work, play, love, friendship, color, creed, race, religion. And all we achieve is fear and mistrust. And it's not just out there, it's deep inside our minds. And when you're driving around the world, you can't skip any borders. You have to drive across every one. And often these borders are in a cornfield, in a hut, where there's men with all power, big guns, and often just me. These men would command me to halt. They would tear open my car doors and ask me, "Do you have drugs? Guns? How much money do you carry?" But at this point, my finely tuned intuition tells me that honesty is not the best policy. I use a credit card. But I start recognizing that as the wishes are growing on the wishmobile, the thoughts contained in the wishes start to influence the men who approach the vehicle. So on the Russian border, the border guards write, "May all men be human," before allowing me into Greater Russia, where my journey takes me across the steppes all the way to Volgograd, where once again I'm a guest of a 5W member called Olga. She is a primary school principal as well, but earns so poorly that she didn't feel comfortable in inviting me to her home. She felt I would be better served by sleeping in her office on some school benches she pushed together. Olga introduces me to her uncles, ex-KGB agents, who now go fishing in Kazakhstan. Their role in my journey is to tell me the best roads to take through Kazakhstan. They take one look at my car and they say, "With this car, you do not go south. You go north." And they send me on a 600-mile detour. Before they do this, they ply me with fresh produce from their garden, and then they sign off on the car from Russia with love, before allowing me into Kazakhstan and onto the best roads they could recommend. My journey through Kazakhstan was approximately 750 miles. It took 6 grueling days, until finally I reached the border of Uzbekistan. And on the Uzbek border, the usual questions of drugs and guns gets the following boost. They ask the internationally important question, "Are you married?" And so I recognize that although borders still give me concern, borders are also magical places. When we cross a border, everything changes. The architecture, the dress, the language, the culture, the thinking changes. And so as I travel through Uzbekistan, my thinking changes once again, and I become quite accustomed to answering that very important Uzbek question that precedes every conversation. Are you married? Nie. Some 3 weeks later, my journey takes me to the gates of China. Some 3 days later, my guide/guard comes carrying some very important documents. I get her to help me create a very important document of my own, the Mandarin transcription of the One Planet, One People project, which I stick to the window of my car and I set off across China, attracting attention wherever I go. This attention gets a little out of hand in Xi'an at the Terracotta Warriors Museum, where a man leaps in front of my moving vehicle. I slam on anchors. The man lives. It's Klaus from Germany. Klaus is thrilled to see a German-registered car right in the middle of China. So thrilled is Klaus, he loses all control, and he starts yelling across the parking lot, hailing his fellow travelers. The commotion attracts more travelers from other tour buses until finally the car is surrounded by an international gathering and gets a global splash of goodwill. Leaving all the tourists to their sightseeing, my journey now takes me across China all the way to the South China Sea, where, for some inexplicable reason, my guide navigates us right into the middle of Taijuan City, nightmare place, where we get thoroughly lost, until finally we stop at a chaotic traffic intersection and ask a local traffic warden for directions. He gives us the fastest directions out of there with the following warning: never to return to the horror that his hometown had become. He then writes on the car, a clean world and clean air for everyone. Mm-hmm. My journey then takes me to Shanghai, where the car is put onto a ship and shipped across the ocean to Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, I'm once again a guest of a 5W member called Kathy. Kathy is so impressed with the One Planet project, she gets her black consciousness leader to come all the way out to write on the car. He gets down and he writes, "One love for world peace," underlining what had become a fairly common wish from around the world. Phil, the next door neighbor, is not to be left out and wants to add his thoughts. And once that's done, I set off once again. My journey takes me from Los Angeles all the way across the deserts, across the mountains, through blizzards, polar vortexes, the Great Plains, all the way to Chicago and beyond to Toronto. In Toronto, I make a U-turn and start traveling down east again, gathering fame and fortune as I go. Yeah. Finally, my journey takes me all the way down to Florida. And in Florida, there's a sign that points to a place called Homo Sasa. And I recognize this entire journey would be incomplete if I didn't visit a place called Homo Sasa. And there I'm approached by a man whom I smell before I see. This is Travis. He's a crab fisherman. And I think he spent the morning making use of the off-hour rates at the local pub. Travis looks over the car and then he holds out his hand. He says, "You all got a pen." Hard-working hands. And I admit, I very gingerly handed him the Sharpie, but Travis was not fazed. He shrugged. He got down and he wrote on the car, "Slow down, look at life." And so, taking Travis's advice to heart, I slowly made my way all the way down to Key West, where, to the amusement of a local traffic warden, I negotiated my car right onto the sidewalk, took that photograph before heading north again to Charleston, where my car was put on a ship. I got onto an aeroplane, and we met up again in the United Kingdom, where my journey took me from the south, from Stonehenge, all the way north to Loch Ness and back down again, gathering thoughts and wishes as I went. Peace, tolerance, respect, no war, no hunger, love. Until finally my journey took me back to Germany, to the very meadow where I'd started a year before. And then my friend looks up from the dishes she's doing and she says, "Oh, you're back. Oh, you haven't changed." Then she looks out the window and she sees the car and she says, "Ah, but the car has." You see, the thoughts of the men from around the world had transformed this perfectly ordinary vehicle into a global artwork of goodwill. Now, this was a change that was easy to see. What about me? Well, I left the car in Germany and I went back to South Africa. There my friends and family said, "Oh, you're back. Oh, you haven't changed." And then they expected me just to get back in that life I left behind, to get back into that box they'd so carefully kept empty for me. And I recognized that if I remained there, the habits of day to day would soon swamp any small changes that might have occurred. So lock, stock, and two smoking barrels, I packed my things and I returned to Europe to start a new life, and found myself in August of 2008 in Belgium, ready to conquer the art world of Antwerp. Within 1 month, the global economy crashed and burned, and any door that might have been open to a stranger slammed firmly shut. I was excluded, adrift, alone. But it was in this moment of crisis that I started recognizing what had changed in me, as I became acutely aware of how the media was using this incident to polarize, to shape, and to shift the thoughts and opinions of the people around me. And I recognized then that in my drive once around the world, I had spent most of my time in a complete media silence. And in that media silence, my thinking had changed. I needed to pin down these changes. So I sat down and I started writing my year of beds, in which I tried to crystallize just how my thinking had changed. And in doing this, I discovered that the way the world is presented to us today by the media, by its twits and its tweets and its sound bites, allows us to make snap decisions about it based on its most extreme behaviors, ignoring entirely the center ground. Through the One Planet, One People project, I recognized that the people who inhabit that center ground, they might look different, sound different, have different cultures, but the core value systems are shared by everyone. They would all like their lives to be based on the 4 pillars of humanity: honor, kindness, tolerance, self-control, things that are contained in the 4-way test of Rotary. In writing this book, I discovered the extreme scope of my own ignorance. But I discovered that having broken through that ego barrier very early on, I had developed a new skill, that of simply being able to say, I don't know. And in being able to say that, I was able to open doors to knowledge that were previously locked to me. And so I discovered that to learn is not to get closer to fulfilled knowledge, but further and further away. It's like flying straight up in the air, allowing the horizon of knowledge to expand and expand, until today's point of view simply vanishes in the great unknown. Not only does knowledge never stop, but it's like the view from high in space, a multidimensional thing which continually expands into new directions, new dimensions, leading to new knowledge. And we control which knowledge is revealed to us by the questions we ask. But it is this love of boxes and borders that defines our thinking and limits the questions we're prepared to ask. And that in turn prevents us from seeing the big picture. And I believe I got a very small glimpse of the big picture. It was late one afternoon in the Karakum desert of Kazakhstan. Those roads you saw earlier, they got worse and worse, until finally I was digging myself out of the sand with a little collapsible US Army spade. I was helping myself out of sand traps with yoga mats. They work a treat. The sand was everywhere, the wind was howling, and the sun was setting. And I realized I wouldn't reach the nearest town before dark. So mentally and physically exhausted, I set up camp all alone in the desert. And then stripped down to my birthday suit to wash sand from places it should never be sand. Finding myself naked and alone in this vast silent space, I become aware of the spin of the earth as the enormous orange sun slides behind the curved horizon of pale ochre sand. Stars start pinpointing the deep blue sky above, and with a slow realization that I'm spinning backwards, I turn to face the rising tide of the Milky Way, a dazzling stream of light, swept together by currents of dark matter that recede into ancient time. Our little galaxy, one of millions, our sun, a grain of sand. In star shadow, the universe draws me in. My mind drops its defenses and travels through dark spaces that are filled with mystery and wonder. Our planet is not a watchtower. The Milky Way is not passing us by. We are part of this vast expanse of space. And in writing this passage, I recognized that this was one of the pivotal moments in my journey, in which this change of thinking started becoming a reality in my life. At this point, I'd been stripped of everything that I thought defined me, of all my comfort zones. I had no language left, no written language, spoken language, even body language failed me. I had no GPS, I had no cell phone, I had no Google, I had no one to ask advice of. The only thing that I had to fall back on was my own thinking, my thoughts, the choices they presented to me, the decisions I made based on those choices, and the actions I took based on those decisions. And because it was such a bare-bones situation, I quickly recognized how immediately my thoughts impacted on my physical outcome. A moment of doubt would see me stuck. A moment of indecision would cause panic, more reason to panic. And so in order to get through this, I started to consciously, unconsciously control my thoughts, to focus them, to get rid of all the unnecessary noise, to hone them in on what was important in that moment. And I believe that was one of the starting points of a journey that took me to a place which we today call being mindful. Being mindful of the power of my thoughts to control my life, and to recognize that it's only when I'm in control of my thoughts that I am in control of my life. And this in turn has brought me back to the United States, where I'm writing a new book, researching a new book called Searching for Galileo, because I recognize that although our science and technology has surged forward since the day of Galileo, our thinking has remained pretty much the same, which is why we have images now beamed in from around the world of people picking up their cell phones and taking a selfie of themselves, just as they pick up a rock and throw it at the thing they do not like. But I also recognize that we are once again in a unique moment in time. Just like in the day of Galileo, where our curiosity, willingness to change, and technology is once again converging to allow us the opportunity to fundamentally change the way we think. And this is what the basis of this book is. I'm traveling, I'm sort of halfway around the United States of America. I'm speaking to groups of people like yourselves. You're all part of a great thought experiment. I'm speaking to people within the groups, having mental jamming sessions with them, asking the unthinkable question, trying to find the unimaginable answer. And I'm having interviews with the people who I believe might become the Galileos of this age, the neuroscientists, who now have the technology to no longer just look out into the world, into the universe beyond, but to turn that back and to look into the universe of possibility contained in our minds. And as they delve deeper and deeper into our brains, they are discovering that most of what we believe to be absolutely true about the way we think is wrong. Our brains are infinitely teachable, trainable, plastic. They are physically growable through appropriate exercise, just like we would build a muscle so we can grow the physical size of our brains. This thinking of you're born with it, just live with it, is absolutely wrong. What you're born with, you can shape and change to anything you choose to do. And as the mainstream becomes aware of how in control they can be of their brains, I believe everybody will start making conscious effort to working towards being more mindful. And as we do this as a group, we will start to recognize that it's not just our thoughts that control our own lives, but our collective thoughts. Just like the thoughts of the men are able to transform this car into an artwork, so our collective thoughts, each one of them, whether it's a conscious thought or an unconscious thought, shapes the society in which we live today and builds the path to the future. And as we learn more about the brain, I believe we will all become consciously aware of this power and start to make positive and proactive contributions in order to build a path to this harmonious future that we all seem to want. Thank you.
We have a little time for questions if you have any. Otherwise,
I'm sure there's questions. Give them a moment, sir. Yes, you see that.
So the obvious question, a woman traveling alone in all sorts of places in the world, what were your security concerns or questions?
My flippant answer is, I come from Africa. We are not afraid.
That always helps.
No, but it is actually true. There is truth in that. Having lived through the revolution in South Africa, I know that if it's not happening to me directly, if that bomb is not falling on my head, it's pointless worrying about it because I probably don't even know that there's something out there. And that also that lack of knowledge, this is something that I discover in the book. As I know less and less about what I should be afraid of, I lose fear. And as I come back and I start traveling through America, where you've got signs that say, do not stop, state prison, do not do this, be careful of that, don't, my fear starts building. So the more I know to fear, the more fearful I am. So in this journey, I didn't know what I was meant to be afraid of, so I just wasn't. And this is the media as well. The media makes quite sure that we're afraid of something all the time. Yeah?
So you have no firearm of any kind in terms of self-protection? No?
That's a terribly American thing. No. The rest of the world actually, carrying guns around is just not done. I don't even know if it's legal. And certainly carrying a gun across a border would, no, not happening. You're not allowed to, I have like these mace pepper sprays, even that. In greater parts of Europe you may not carry. Yeah. Yes.
To your point, and if you ever feel like you want to share this in any context, please feel free to. You reminded me of when I was on my honeymoon during the swine flu scare, and we were in Mexico, and all of our friends, cautioned us not to go. And when we got back, weren't you frightened? Weren't you afraid? And our answer was only when we turned on the American news.
Yeah. Yes, you're quite right. The American news is a dreadful thing, I'm sorry to say, but it truly is. It truly is. I have absolutely stopped watching the news. I just will not allow my brain to be polluted by this. It's like junk food for the brain. It really is. It's a terrible thing. So, questions? The knowledge that is revealed to you depends on the questions you ask, and the questions are the difficult part. The car didn't break down.
I'm amazed at that.
Yeah. So how did you decide on men over 35 to ride on your car?
It was a couple of things. First of all, men. I wanted to define a group. So you went through the kids and the whole. And I thought, nothing against little children, but truly they are given far too much credit. One requires some time and some life experience before you can truly be wise. This is just the truth of it. So I was hoping that men above the age of 35 had sort of developed to a certain point where they'd gone beyond the testosterone-driven activities and sort of gotten into a somewhat more philosophical phase of their lives. And also, of course, it was a sort of a socio-political thing. Men drive a seat of the planet, despite the fact that women have achieved. Men are still pretty much behind the steering wheel, and it's like. So I wanted to know what they would say to a very fluffy girl question, a wish for the world. And so I discovered, through my intensive research, that at heart, all men are beauty queens. They all want world peace. And so this next book is to try and discover why, in our thinking, we just never actually get to that which we want. Why we always go somewhere else. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So what would be your wish for that you would put on your car? How'd you?
I did secretly have little wishes on the inside of the car as they sort of popped up, and one of them was a global language. In South Africa, we have 11 official languages. It makes it incredibly difficult to break through cultural barriers, because simply you don't understand one another. That's not to take away from people's culture, or to say we only need to have one language that's it in the world, but it would be nice as the world globalizes. We have a global computer language, we have a global mathematical language. It would be nice to have a global philosophical language, that we all could speak the same language and understand each other when we discuss things like politics, like religion, like, these things that concern us on a very humane level. So that would be nice, and I don't think it would be too difficult to institute. So that was one of my little wishes. My other little wish was that I wished that wisdom had more value than wealth. That the pursuit of wisdom was considered a more valuable thing than the pursuit of wealth. So there were a couple of those things, yeah.
Where's the car?
I tried to sell it to Renault as an artwork, but I had to go through their gatekeepers, who are the advertising agencies. And the advertising agencies were very stuck in their branding, Formula One, and they came back to me and said, we don't see any value in it. So, okay.
Okay.
Whatever. So eventually I just gave it to my friend. She's also called Annette, and she drives it now in Germany as a work. Yeah, so it's doing good duty.
All right. Well, cool. Annette,
before we run out
thank
of
you again.
time, I want to preempt a question, I beg your pardon. Why America? I want to just explain why I'm doing this in America. It's got to do with borders. I've now driven from Richmond, Virginia, all the way north to Washington, blah, blah, and all the way around, and I have gone once around the perimeter by the time I'm done. In this entire period, I will not have to take out my passport once. This is an incredible thing for such a large piece of real estate. Even in big countries like China and Russia, you're constantly stopped. to show your papers. The other thing addresses this language issue. I've spoken to people with diverse opinions about the same thing in America, many of them. And I can understand them all if I choose to, because there is no language barrier in America. And that's an incredibly powerful thing, which I think Americans tend to neglect just a little. And then the third thing is the genetic thing. Genetics is a very powerful new epigenetics, new scientific direction, which is going to change the way we think about ourselves in a very fundamental way. But you came from rebellious stock. Your ancestors came here by choice from Europe or wherever. They arrived here to start this new thing, this unthinkable thing called America. And in doing this, you intermingled and mixed up and created a new kind of human, which we now call Americans. And this new human has a very innovative strain. And so I always say that business of America is not what the economists would have us believe today, business. The business of America is innovation. And so this is what I'm tapping into while I'm here in America. So these are the reasons that I'm here. And finally, because you're Americans, you're all asking this question in your little heads, but you're not going to speak it out because you're so polite. You're going, how does she afford all this? This journey, the first one around the world, I sold a house. I'm all out of houses. Now I sell books. I got lots of books. You're welcome to help this journey along. The books are available to you. $29, cash, credit card, or check. The cheapest round the world trip you're ever going to get. Thank you.
Ernie.